Hey everyone, I'm Brazinger, and this is World of Tanks news for the 23rd of Feb 2013. Coming up in the show today, World of Tanks Assistant gets a new update, and World of Tanks 8.4 patch notes. The important parts. Let's kick it off with the mobile app, shall we? For those of you who don't know anything about the WoT Assistant, it's a smartphone application which gives you access to your battle statistics, in-game currency balance, and all the latest news about World of Tanks. So recently, Wargaming announced a new update for it, which is called the Update 1.4, and with it, they proudly announced that this app has been installed on over 1 million mobile phones worldwide since its launch. That's pretty impressive, don't you think? What's new in 1.4, you ask? Firstly, now the app can be synchronized between Android and iOS for an equal experience on both devices, which means you can now access the program for your own information on both systems without problems. Also, they added the ability to check achievements you have earned in-game, and you can share those to your social networks with a simple one-button click. You can now sort vehicles by class, nation, battles, victories, and tier. You can even finally filter news by categories. I'm sure that this will make a lot of people happy. Recently, the public testing for World of Tanks version 8.4 started and the patch notes for it were made public. So, what are all the changes coming with this patch? The most important part of this patch is definitely the addition of British tank destroyers. At Tier 2, we can see the Universal Carrier QF 2-pounder. The Universal Carrier was developed during the interwar period and was one of the main armoured tracked vehicles used by British Commonwealth forces. A total of 90,000 vehicles were produced. It was mainly used for transporting purposes, but in 1940 a variant was developed which had a 40mm anti-tank gun mounted. The tank has 10mm of armor in front, 7 on sides and back. At best equipped with this 6-pound AT gun Mark I, this thing can hit for 53 to 88 damage. The penetration rate is at about 57mm. It takes around 1.7 seconds to aim, and it can fire 18.75 times per minute. Also, this vehicle is fairly fast, with the speed limit being at 48 km per hour. At Tier 3, we can see the Valentine AT. The Valentine AT only existed as a prototype. It was based on the Valentine and mounted a powerful 17-pounder and anti-tank gun. The prototype had a 6-cylinder diesel engine rated at around 192 horsepower. This tank has 60mm of armor all around. At best equipped with a QF 6-pounder AT gun Mark IV, this destroyer can deal an average of about 70 to 80 damage per hit. Its standard penetration is about 110mm. Accuracy for this gun is very decent. The tank itself looks like it's a really weak target against artillery fire. The speed doesn't help either. It can only drive at a maximum of 24 km per hour. At Tier 4, we can see the Alectro. I think that's how you pronounce it. This tank destroyer was developed from 1944 to 1945 on the basis of the Tetrarch light tank. The project was cancelled upon the end of World War II. This destroyer has 10mm of armor all around, so it's really easy to penetrate, but it's small, so that kind of makes up for it, I guess. At best equipped with a 25-pounder AT gun howitzer Mark III, this thing can fire up to 10.53 shells per minute. Its average penetration rate is around 60 to 70mm, and it deals around 135 to 225 damage per hit. It's also a really fast vehicle with an engine for 180 horsepower, giving it a top speed of 50.5 km per hour. At Tier 5, we can find the AT 102, aka the Assault Tank II. This vehicle was designed to break through enemy defensive lines. The design was completed by May 15, 1943. However, no prototypes were built. This vehicle has 203 mm of armor in front and 101 on sides and back. At best equipped with a 6-pounder AT gun Mark V, this destroyer can fire up to 26 shots per minute and deal an average of about 70 to 80 damage per shell. The penetration value, however, isn't all that great for this gun, for a tier 5. At tier 6 we can find the AT8, which has a really nice hull design. It's low and flat, so it's not easy to hit from behind the mountain or behind lower obstacles. The vehicle itself was conceived as a breakthrough. The design evolved from the 87 project. Both projects were submitted at the same time, although no prototypes were built, because the A39 Tortoise was preferred, and I can understand from the game's perspective why that is, but we'll get there in a minute. This destroyer has 203 mm of armor in front and 102 on sides and back. At best equipped with a 17-pounder AT gun Mark VII, this gun can fire up to 14 shells per minute with an average penetration value of about 128 to 214 mm, and the damage output between 113 to 188 damage per hit. At tier 7 we can see the 87, which has a really interesting design. The best thing about the gun position is that you can easily hide most of your hull behind cover while still being able to shoot the enemy. Although the problem with it is that you can't turn it all that well. This assault tank was completed by June 10th, 1943 as a design, but no prototypes were built. Some parts created for this particular vehicle were used for the Tortoise. This vehicle has 203 mm of armor in front and 101 on sides and back. At best equipped with a 20-pounder AT gun Type A barrel, this destroyer can fire up to 10 shots per minute, with a really nice penetration value of 226 mm. Average damage is around 230 and 250 per shell. It takes a whole 2.1 seconds to aim though. At tier 8 we can see the AT-15. This tank was designed to break through fortified positions. The design was ready by fall of 1943, but no prototypes were built. However, this project became the basis for the Tortoise heavy assault tank. This tank has 228 mm of armor in front, 152 on sides and 101 in the rear. At best equipped with a 32-pounder AT gun, the penetration value is 214 mm and average damage is about 250 per shell. At tier 9 we can finally see the A39 Tortoise. This one looks really similar to the AT-15 for obvious reasons. The development for the Tortoise began in 1942. The design was finalized by Feb 1944 and an order was placed for 25 vehicles. However, by the end of World War II, only 6 tanks had been built. This assault tank was designed to clear heavily fortified areas and as a result favored armor protection over mobility. Since the Tortoise had a fixed casemate superstructure instead of a turret, it can be classified as a self-propelled gun or an assault tank, not a tank. Internally it was split into 3 compartments: transmission to the front, the crew in the center, and the Rolls-Royce Meteor engine at the rear. The suspension consisted of 4 bogies. I hope that's how you pronounce it. On each side of the hull. Each bogie had 2 pairs of wheels, with each pair linked to the traverse torsion bar. The merit brown transmission was fitted with an all-speed reverse, giving it an approximately the same speed backwards as forwards, which is pretty good to get away from the enemy if you're in trouble. The Tortoise has 225mm of armor in front, 225 on sides, and 178 in the rear. At best equipped with the 120mm AT gun L1A1, its average penetration is 169mm and the damage is at 400 per shell. Finally, at tier 10, we can see the FV215B 183. This proposed heavy self-propelled gun utilized the components of the Mark II Conqueror. It also looks similar to it. The vehicle featured the gun in a rear-mounted oscillating turret and was also built on the hull of the Conqueror. The project was cancelled shortly after the dummy vehicle was built. This vehicle is pretty weak. It has 256mm of armor in front and only 76 on sides and back. At best equipped with the 183mm AT gun, this tank can only shoot twice per minute, but it does extreme damage. It can penetrate an average of 310mm of armor with standard ammunition and deal an average of 1150 damage per shell. For high explosive shells it can penetrate an average of 92mm and deal about 1750 damage per hit. Aiming time is a whole 3.4 seconds though, so be careful when moving around. There was also a new premium tank destroyer added to the USSR Tech tree. It's the Su-100Y. It was developed on the basis of the T-100 heavy tank. It was intended to neutralize enemy pillboxes and destroy enemy vehicles. The only prototype was built in March 1940. The vehicle never entered mass production. Historically, however, it was a self-propelled gun, apparently. I tried this thing and it's extremely powerful for a tier 6 vehicle. It can fairly easily one-shot tier 5 and 6 vehicles. Mounted with a 130mm P13S2, it can fire almost 4 shots per minute. Average penetration is about 196mm and it deals around 440 damage per shell. It takes a whole 2.9 seconds to aim though. Last but not least, 8.4 also introduced 3 new light tanks to the German tech tree. First there is the tier 2 Panzer 1A, which was the very first mass-produced German tank. In 1935 the design received an upgrade including elongated hull and a more powerful engine. Mass production of this version, the Panzer 1B, eventually totaled 675 tanks. The standard armament was weak, but some tanks were upgraded on the battlefield to mount 20mm guns. Many of the problems in the Panzer 1A were corrected with the introduction of the Panzer 1B. The engine was replaced by the water-cooled 6-cylinder Maybach NL38TR, developing 98 horsepower, and the gearbox was changed to a more reliable model. The larger engine, however, required an extension of the vehicle's hull by 40 centimeters, and this allowed the improvement of the tank's suspension, adding an additional bogie wheel and raising the tensioner. The tank's weight increased by a whole 0.4 tons. In total, 840 tanks were built, but those aforementioned 675 were the only combat models. In-game I was equipped with the 2 cm Breda, which can fire a total of 158 shells per minute. Average penetration is 30 mm and it deals 11 damage per hit. The tank's hull is pretty well built. In front it has a really steep slope. Its armor is 30 mm all around. Second new tank is the Panzer 1C on Tier 3. The initial order for this tank was placed in 1939. It was originally conceived as a high-speed reconnaissance tank for airborne units. Mass production started at the beginning of 1942. In early 1943, the two vehicles were deployed with the 1st Tank Division. Another 38 vehicles were deployed with the 58th Reserve Tank Corps in the summer of 1944. The Panzer 1C was designed jointly between Gross Maffei and Daimler-Benz in 1939 to provide an amply armored and armed reconnaissance light tank. It boasted a completely new hull and turret, a modern torsion bar suspension and 5 interleaved road wheels. This tank offers 30 mm of armor in front and 20 on sides and in the rear. I mounted it with the 7.92 mm Mauser EV-141. This gun can fire almost 254 shells per minute, penetrate an armor of 33 mm on average, and deal about 8 damage per successful hit. The last tank introduced to the German line is the Panzer II-G. On June 18, 1938, Daimler-Benz received an order for an initial batch of 75 Panzer II-G tanks. A prototype was built in 1939. The vehicle was mass-produced from April 1941 to Feb 1942, with a total of only 12 tanks built. The final suspension configuration used for the Panzer II tanks was the 5 overlapping road wheels, configuration termed Schachtelaufwerk by the Germans. This was used as the basis for the redesign of the Panzer II into a reconnaissance tank with high speed and good off-road performance. The Panzer II-G was the first Panzer II to use this configuration and was developed with the experimental designation VK901. There is no record of the Panzer II-G being issued to combat units. The turrets were subsequently issued for use in fortifications. The tank in-game can drive up to 65 km per hour. It also has 30 mm of armor in front, 20 on sides and 14 in the rear. Its turret has 30 mm of armor in the front, 14 in the sides and in the rear. I equipped with the 3 cm MK103, which can fire 23 shells per minute, penetrate an average of 95 mm of armor and deal about 30 damage per hit. The US received a new Tier 6 SPG called Sexton, but I have no information about this vehicle. Sorry for that. I forgot to mention one of the British tank destroyers. It's a Tier 6 and is called Churchill Gun Carrier. This vehicle was developed on the basis of the Churchill tank, as the name says. The cabin with the 3-inch gun was placed in the front. Initially 100 vehicles were ordered. Later the order was reduced to 24. Eventually a total of 50 vehicles were built between 1941 and 1942. However, they never saw action, but they will in the game. This destroyer has 88 mm of armor in the front, 63 on the sides and 50 in the rear. At best mounted with the 32-pounder AT gun, it fires up to 7 shells per minute and deals around 250 damage per successful hit. Its penetration value is about 214 to 220 millimeters. Now that the tanks are out of the way, we can move on with a few other things from the patch notes. For example, Dragon Ridge and Serene Coast were removed from the random battle rotation for reworking. It's the second time they removed Dragon Ridge. A battle tutorial was added for new players to learn the basics of the game. Also, the frame rate in the hangar was forcibly limited to 60. And finally they added a windowed full screen option. At least I've been waiting for it for ages. Looks, VK1602 and VK2801 are now tier 4, 5 and 6 respectively, and their characteristics were rebalanced accordingly. I also found an interesting fix for the WZ-131 tank. It had its left and right tracks mixed up before. I think that this covers the more important parts of the recent news. Hopefully you liked it, and maybe leave some feedback to the comment section under this video. I'm Brazinger, and this was World of Tanks News Part 1. See you out there.